Shaheen, and this is my Chapter 1 summary presentation. The presentation agenda. I'll mostly cover the key terms that we went through, but I'll also make sure to give briefings of the rest. The key terms will be bolded. And in the middle of these definitions, I'll also give some visuals and examples to strengthen the concepts. Introduction to programming. A program is a set of instructions executed by a computer. An algorithm is a step-by-step procedure to solve a problem. And more important than those two, arguably, is input, process, and output, a sequential order. It's the fundamental structure of a program where data is received, processed, and displayed. Additionally, computational thinking is just a method of problem solving and breaking into different smaller tasks. And the variables are like things like X, Y, Z. You could assign them to different things, to different values. An example of input process output would be something like a mouse or keyboard giving an input into a chip or the CPU, which interacts with the storage, which I'll mention more about later on, which will produce an output into something like a printer, a screen, or something related. Writing and running Python code. Python interpreter is the software that executes Python code line by line. A prompt is a symbol where the user enters Python commands. A statement is a single line of executable Python code, and expressions are code that evaluates to a value. Additionally, an interactive interpreter is a Python execution environment that runs the code immediately. Code is the instructions written to do something. A line is a single instruction, and an assignment is storing values in a variable, as mentioned previously. An example of a prompt is shown in the console, where after you get an input command, which we'll cover more later, you'll have this opportunity to type in a value before the rest of the code is run through using that related value. Basic input and output. The print command, it displays an output on the screen with whatever is inside of the print command. Comments are lines ignored by Python using that hashtag over there. An example is given. A string is a sequence of characters enclosed in quotes. New line given, it moves it to the next line. An escape sequence is special characters in strings. And white space. This is very, very important. White space is things like spaces, tabs, and new lines that affect formatting and outputs for what the person on the other end sees. And another thing, input, as mentioned previously, is what receives a user input from the keyboard. To emphasize white space, I've given an example from challenge activity 1.3.1, where it says complete the program with 5 print statements to output the following figure with asterisks. And it gives that desired output down there. It also says white space matters. Make sure your white space matches exactly the expected output. The solution given up in the top right is what I produced, and luckily it worked. And I just wanted to make sure that I emphasize the fact that the spaces were included in the writing of the code to produce that output. If you did not put spaces there, you would not get that specific spacing. The white spacing is very important for a proper output. Data types and errors in Python. Syntax error. It's a mistake in code structure. An example is a missing colon somewhere. Uh, Indentation errors, improper uses of spaces or tabs or things like white space in Python. And a logic error is a bug, as you'll commonly hear it, which says that code runs but produces incorrect results. Other things that are important that I'll mention uh, is something like an int. When you want to turn something, you want to turn a value into an integer. A runtime error, more commonly heard of as a crash, is that it's an error that occurs during the execution of the code. A value error is an invalid value for a function, example given. Name error, using an undefined variable, you haven't assigned it a value. And a type error, mismatched data types. An example of a logic error, as mentioned previously, from what was mentioned as try 1.4.1, says that the code given on the top left produced a logic error. That means it ran, but it did not give the desired output of the code. It did not give what was intended for it to produce. The issue was those two apostrophes, two lone apostrophes around the variable total underscore beans. uh, it did print, it printed total underscore beans space total. But the idea was to have it print the total number of beans, which was assigned a value previously, which was num underscore beans times num underscore jars. So in the bottom right, it shows the two apostrophes were taken away, and that way it produces the number, which should be 1500 space total. Development tools and execution. An integrated development environment, or an IDE, is a software for coding with features like debugging, such as Visual Studio Code. Syntax highlighting is colors in the editor to distinguish code elements. You'll see them in Visual Studio Code as something like purple, blue, or green to distinguish different kinds of elements in your code. And a console or a terminal is an interface for running commands. Other things such as an automatic delimiter completion is a process that auto closes brackets or paired items in quotes. A command line interface or CLI is a text-based system interaction, and a command line argument puts inputs passed to a program via the CLI, and switches are additional options that modify CLI commands. Hardware and computing basics. Memory, it stores data temporarily, such as RAM, or permanently in a disk. Machine instructions are binary commands that are executed by the CPU or the chip. And high-level languages are human-readable programming languages. An example, Python. Bits are the smallest data units, you'll see them as zeros and ones. Processors are hardware executing instructions. Instruction is a low-level command for a CPU. An executable program is a compiled program that is ready to run already. And assembly is a low-level language between machine code and high-level languages. Python ecosystem and programming concepts. An interpreter is a software executing scripts line by line. Backwards compatibility is the ability of newer versions of code, such as Python 3, to run older versions of code, such as Python 2.7. If it can't run Python 2.7 from Python 3, then it is not backwards compatible. Open source, freely available and modifiable software. Importance of whitespace, I will keep saying it because I'm sure it's very important and it was mentioned multiple times, that Python enforces indentation for readability. And programming is all about precision. Exact syntax and logic are required to produce appropriate outputs. Appreciate it. Good luck, everybody.